Hi, this is Manjula Narayan, books editor, Hindustan Times, and I'm with Ira Mukhoty, whose lovely book, Daughters of the Sun, is just out.
Thank you.
And thank you for.
Thank you very much.
And it's about empresses, queens, and begums of the Mughal Empire. So maybe we should read a little bit of the flap. Okay. In 1526, when the nomadic Timurid warrior scholar Babur rode into Hindustan, his wives, sisters, daughters, aunts, and distant female relatives traveled with him. These women would help establish a dynasty and empire that would rule India for the next 200 years and become a byword for opulence and grandeur. By the second half of the 17th century, the Mughal Empire was one of the largest and richest in the world. The Mughal women, unmarried daughters, eccentric sisters, fiery milk mothers, and powerful wives, often worked behind the scenes and from within the zenana, but there were some notable exceptions among them who rode into battle with their men, built stunning monuments, engaged in diplomacy, traded with foreigners, and minted coins in their own names. Others wrote biographies and patronized the arts. The Daughters of the Sun, in The Daughters of the Sun, we meet remarkable characters like Khanzada Begum, who at 65 rode on horseback through 750 kilometers of icy passes and unforgiving terrain to parley on behalf of her nephew Humayun. Gulbadan Begum, who gave us the only document written by a woman of the Mughal royal court, a rare glimpse into the harem, as well as a chronicle of the trials and tribulations of three emperors, Babur, Humayun, and Akbar, her father, brother, and nephew. Akbar's milk mothers or foster mothers, Jiji Anaga and Maham Anaga,
Anga, I think, yeah.
No? Who shielded and guided the 13-year-old emperor until he came of age. Noor Jahan, light of the world, a widow and mother, who would become Jahangir's last and favorite wife, acquiring an imperial legacy of her own. And so it goes on. So all these like fascinating women, and she's, and I'm really amazed that nobody else has written a book about them. Why do you think that is?
Yes, I think it is a real lapse in our history, and I think Indian history per se hasn't been written about the way it should be, and women in Indian history definitely have been ignored in perhaps, I don't know, there are academic works out there, dealing with certain aspects of these women, but there hasn't been a concerted effort to examine the lives of these women and understand the zenana and what it really was through these 200 years of history. And I think it's a general feeling in India that the stories of women are somehow in some way less important and don't need to be validated in the same way as that of men, perhaps.
But also what I found fascinating about this, and you mentioned it even in your introduction, about how the idea of the zenana, our idea of the zenana, of the harem, was sort of like created by the Europeans, by the European view, as it being this highly sexualized space where the, emperor's going crazy with all these women, when actually this is like an extended family. Some of them might be his wives and his concubines, but largely it's like sisters, aunts, mothers, stepmothers.
That's right, and that was a real discovery for me as well. I didn't have an exact idea of what a harem was, but certainly it was the one you were talking about of, a male figure with lots of women dancing in attendance on him.
And you just think of sex, actually.
Actually, you do, right? And no doubt the European men were thinking that, and they were like, wow, how beautiful must these women be, and I wish I could get to see behind the veil, and they were obsessed with this desire to see behind the veil. And so they created this sort of fantasy world which we have inherited in our post-colonial, imagination. But it was, as you say, almost like an extended Indian family, maybe many times so, but just a congregation of women and young children and extended widowed members of the family and guests passing through, and it was this kind of boisterous, chaotic space, which was not really just about, or mostly not about, sex at all.
At all.
Yes.
It's domesticity.
Yes. Some of the Jesuits, in fact, wrote in a very wondering way that, Akbar has so many women but so few children. So they were implying that there's not a great deal of sexual contact happening with all these women. So what is going on? They could not understand that these women were not sexually available women to Akbar. They were his family members.
Yeah.
So that was something which was very interesting for me to study the development of this zanana.
It's like the Indian joint family multiplied.
Multiplied, exactly, 100 times over. Yeah. Though the earlier kings, of course, didn't have these extensive, harems. It's really from the time of Akbar onwards.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, I mean, in the earlier generations, like, what I found fascinating about the story of Khanzada Begum, the sister of Babur, is that she actually gets abducted,
yes,
right, and then comes back and then is sent back 10 years later after she's been through 2 marriages.
Yes.
But she becomes really, she's considered powerful. She's a powerful figure for many years.
Yes.
So there was no, unlike at the same time, you mentioned it too, Rajputs and the rest of India were like putting a very high price on chastity and exclusivity and preferring Johar and Sati to remarriage, to widow remarriage.
Yeah.
So that's very fascinating. Talk about that.
One of the reasons I chose to write about Khanzada in such in depth was that I was amazed that not only was there no stigma attached to her, but she was rewarded for having made this choice and this sacrifice for her brother, for her family, for the Timurid legacy. And she was made the Padshah Begum, which was the most respected woman of her time. So not only was there no stigma around the whole issue of sexual chastity, it was something that was deeply appreciated, and they were very loving towards her and respectful towards her. And her exact contemporary, the Rajputs, at the same time were burning their women at this, when they were faced with death and dishonor, because everything was placed on the sexual chastity of the women. They were not considered to have a mind, to have a thinking body. It was all about sexual purity. So it was very refreshing to see that the Mughals, maybe coming from Central Asia with their nomadic customs, did not put that kind of emphasis only on a woman's sexual, availability and purity. And widows were so this led to the fact that widows were very free to remarry, were encouraged to remarry, so that they were not left without.
Noor Jahan was a widow. Right?
Noor Jahan was famously a widow. And so, in fact, many of the women were encouraged to remarry when they were widows. There was no stigma attached to having a second or a third husband, or to having fallen in battle by, being taken by by the enemies. And they were always respected and accepted back into the fold when they were able to get away. So when Babur finally won the Battle of Panipat and established his empire, he sent a letter out saying every Timurid person is going to be a guest in Hindustan, and I invite all of you to come. So many widows and many women who had lost their men, or who had been abducted, who had been taken by the enemy, were able to escape and find a place of safety with Babur.
So these are things one doesn't think about. It's so complex, and it's like so. These are aspects of the lives of these people that have not been, I don't know, they haven't been.
I think they've been completely ignored, and there's been a certain, I suppose, laziness, and we've just accepted the interpretations that we have received from the, the English writings, because there's quite a bit of Oriental writing around the harem, and also there were many English visitors, adventurers and merchants who came to India during the time of the Mughals and wrote extensively. So they are easily available to us because they're in English, where some of the other documents are in Persian, are in Urdu, and have become inaccessible to us because now, we don't read Persian and Urdu in the way that we used to. So it's kind of easy to read the English account and absorb that. So we've been a little bit lazy and complacent, and haven't gone beyond this given, narrative to understand really what it was all about.
What I find fascinating about some bits of your book is that how these characters were like long dead, like, 300, 400 years ago. But you still managed to like pick out little bits about their character and highlight that. And it makes you laugh, like as the reader, the jokes that sort of, people back then might have laughed at, like Rose mustache and his general outfit, and you say that they looked through the Zanana's jali and laughed, and they were probably laughing at him.
That's right.
And they probably were.
That's right. That's what I figured. She must have seen him with his ruffles around his neck, and his mustache flying up like that, and Mughal noblemen were in these long, kabas and the hair and the turban, and she must have thought, what is this preening idiot doing in my court, So wherever possible, as you say, I have tried to use the exact words of women if they are available to us, and they are available in certain texts like Gulbadan's biography. So for me, as a writer of this book, these kind of sources have been invaluable. And I've used them wherever I could, because I feel that gives us a true sense of what the women really were like. Because if we hear their voices, then we understand that they were not so very different from us, you know.
Yes.
Right? You feel a sense of
exactly
connection. They actually have the same griefs and the same hopes and ambitions and aspirations as we do, you know.
Yes.
When the wives sometimes feel upset because Humayun has gone to see some other wife or his sister. Why are you seeing your sister rather than me? I mean, isn't this something we would think about even today?
Yes.
So I feel that
that scene where you mentioned, I think one of the begums, I can't remember her name, she pulls him up pulls Humayun up.
Bega Begum was
Begum.
often pulling up Humayun for this, yes.
Why did you not come and meet me?
Yes, and she's quoted by Gulbadan clearly, like such sharp words to the Mughal Padshah. She's saying,
wouldn't even do it in the open.
I know, but in front of all the other begums and all the attendants, she's saying, you know, there are no thorns in the path to my house. Why aren't you coming to my house? You know, and I found that so poignant, because you can really understand the woman.
Yeah.
And it didn't mean that Humayun loved her less, or that she was highly respected, and she was so loyal to his memory that she built the Humayun's tomb.
Yes.
So, you know, she's a very multi-layered, textured and interesting woman to read about.
Yeah, all these women are, I mean, and even Gulbadan, you know, talk about Gulbadan and her, you know, her work.
She was this amazing woman. You know, we encounter her for the first time around 6 or 7 years old, when she is riding into Hindustan from Kabul to join Babur, who has just established his nascent empire. And she meets her father again after, I think, a distance of a few years, you know, and she writes so movingly about meeting her father again, and that he held her in his arms, and you think of Babur, you know.
Yeah.
We all kind of think, oh, the marauder maybe, you know, or this conquering hero, whichever way, but not as a tender father. So anyhow, she comes, she meets him, and she spends many years, you know, that with Babur. Then Babur dies early, and she's with Humayun. And with Humayun, the first few years, they are journeying all over Hindustan, because he gets, you know, as we know, evicted from India very early on. But when they come back, they are all reunited, and many years later, when Akbar is king, he comes to Gulbadan and says, write down all your memories of my father Humayun, and even Babur, whatever you remember. And she writes this extraordinarily vivid account of her father, you know, and of their travails and their journeys, and herself riding everywhere on horseback, you know, with her family. And then, having written this, I think before this, she goes on a Hajj for 7 years, and it's an all-woman Hajj. So there is a chaperone, because you cannot go anywhere without a male at that time, but it is an all-women party. She is the head of this party, and she goes for 7, you know, tumultuous years, and she has all kinds of adventures. And it seems that even when she comes back after 7 years, she is reluctant to go back home to the court. And the biographer writes that she keeps making unnecessary journeys to go to Chishti, to go to Ajmer. You know, like, what is she doing?
Oh God, I go back home.
Do I have to? Like, after 7 years, are they bringing me back to court, you know? And when she goes back to court, she is extremely surprised to find that there are all these Jesuit missionaries. They've come in the time that she was away. And Gulbadan, along with Hamida Banu, sort of make the atmosphere difficult enough for the Jesuits that they have to leave. So we see the power of these women, sometimes indirectly, through all these things, through all the influence that they have on the emperors, you know, and their brothers and their fathers. Even if they don't say it openly, the Jesuits write and say, now that this Begum has come back, she and you know, the Queen Mother are making it impossible for us, we must leave. So look at the power that they have, you know, they're able to influence the missionary embassy to the court. And so she lived for many years and wrote her biography and had a very adventurous life, and then really was forgotten about till the early 20th century. Her book was translated, and you know, we found out about her. But I feel that it has still been very underutilized, and we still need to find out more about her through her writing.
You know, I felt completely ignorant when I first heard, you know, when I read the book and I heard about it. I said, wow, how come we haven't, you know, why isn't this out there, you know, more highlighted?
It isn't. I hope people read, and I hope people have the same reaction, that it's so fun to read about these women and, you know, discover them maybe for the first time, or at least discover aspects of them. Like Noor Jahan, I was initially quite hesitant to write about her. I thought maybe I won't write about her at all, you know. But then I thought, okay, I'll write about her, but let me try and find a different angle too. Let us see her not just as this supposedly a woman who had Jahangir in her sexual thrall, because that's what's implied by the English writings. Why was this woman so powerful?
She was much more intelligent than that. She was just a sex object.
She was not at all. She was in fact very smart, very talented and very ambitious, and had a fantastic aesthetic sense which aligned exactly with the way Jahangir saw the future of Mughal art, and he was very interested in art. And her sense of aesthetics was matched his exactly. So when he was unable to do very much, he was a drinker and an opium addict. So when he felt out of sorts and was unable to do very much, she took over this role, and she made sure that there were amazing banquets and feasts, and there were artists who were being encouraged, and she developed different kinds of cloths, So she contributed in ways far more complex than we imagine.
And one final question, who's your favorite Mughal woman?
That's a really tough one, because you feel so fond of all these women when you do so much studying. But I probably have a soft spot for Khanzada Begum. Okay. She's one of the furthest in time, but yet she feels so alive and immediate.
Okay, great. And she's like a real hero.
She is.
Horseback
riding.
Being sacrificed to save her brother's life.
Correct.
Enduring, I don't know, must have been terrible being married to these.
Must have been this Uzbek warlord, how did he treat her, forced marriage, but 10 years and you never hear that there was any, that she had any issue with that, or that it was a problem for her. She just went on and was the most respected woman.
I've got to do it.
That's it, yeah.
Okay, so Ira, thank you so much for, speaking to me.
Thanks very much.
This is really a good book. It's very interesting, opens your eyes to lots of things. It makes you, look at your own maybe prejudices.
Perhaps, yes.
And ideas about women of a certain cultural background, of a certain time even.
Correct.
We think that we're so liberated, but hey, I think these, especially the early women,
yes,
far
can't
more liberated.
Beat them. Correct.
You can't beat them. So thanks so much.
Thank you so much.